Living in the Valley, this agricultural community, I've experienced a lot of different foods that I wouldn't have normally tried. Kale, which I've grown to love, kohlrabi, which I still think is something from an alien planet. But perhaps the culinary adventure of this story is a bridge too far, even for me. Please welcome Mariana Lachiusa.
Click, click, click. I heard a familiar yet terrifying sound coming from the tomato plants. Oh, God, no. They're here. It was a hot, late July day in the tomato high tunnel, and I began searching through the dense jungle of tomato vines. I knew they were here. I felt their presence. And sure enough, there was the defoliated plants, and there was a fat, green, horned, 3-inch-long spawn of Satan. The Shrek finger lookalike that is the bane of every self-respecting tomato grower. I'm talking, of course, about the tomato hornworm. After this crisis, my plans for the morning went on hold, because I knew where there was one, there were definitely more. And sure enough, like some perverse version of I Spy, I began to see them everywhere. It was a full-on greenhouse assault. So I plucked myself up, and I went to the barn to choose my weapon. And I came back brandishing an empty Gatorade bottle from the recycling bin. And with that, I began harvesting my foe. I picked what felt like thousands until I finally ran out of water bottles from the recycling. And in July especially, farmers drink a lot of water, so there is no shortage of water bottles, okay? Yeah, after that, it felt like a good time to stop for lunch. So I sat there, watching these writhing green sausages in their plastic prison, and suddenly my kale and pesto and avocado sandwich on a spinach wrap was just way too green. Ugh. After lunch, I had other things to attend to, so I left the hornworms trapped where they were. And I came back many hours later to find them baking alive in the sun. And most of them had stopped moving, and I felt really bad about it. And it was only then that I looked at them closely, maybe for the first time ever, and I realized how kind of pretty they are. They're this light spring green with little white stripes and all these dots on it that kind of look like eyeballs. They're really endearing in a kind of like ugly duckling way. And it was through no fault of their own they were in my greenhouse. I mean, it's what they're supposed to do. I had to admire their audacity and their veracity, because they will demolish a greenhouse in just a couple days. It's amazing, it really is. So even though I still cringed every time I walked by the high tunnel, it was with an undertone of pity. And not to worry, I was back in that greenhouse just a few days later. And as I walked down the aisles, I felt and heard a squish. I looked under my boot and I found a squished green tomato. But it wasn't a tomato. It was a hornworm. And it's funny how kind of similar they look. And maybe it was the hot sun or low blood sugar, but at that moment, I felt a feeling never before inspired by a bug. Hunger. After that, I began researching hornworms in my spare time. Turns out, not the only one who's ever thought about eating bugs. And I found forums, appreciation pages, even recipes. So one fine summer evening, I left work at the farm with half a dozen green tomatoes and a bottle of fresh hornworms. In my kitchen, I took those Shrek finger lookalikes. I coated them in cornmeal, fried them up to a nice crisp golden brown, paired them with some green tomatoes, a little roasted red pepper, just a dash of Parmesan. and I took a bite. And it was crunchy on the outside and kind of squishy, chewy on the inside. And that first one just tasted like a worm, as I expected. But the second one tasted like a fried green tomato with just a hint of basil. Wow. By that third one, I needed no convincing. I was sold on it. And I had the realization that the only thing that had kept me back from eating and enjoying bugs my entire life was the yuck factor. I mean, once you get past the little wiggly bits in the eyes, they ain't half bad. And of course they tasted like tomatoes. I mean, hornworms spend their entire lives just chowing down on tomato plants. And after all, we are what we eat. So there's that. Anyhow, even though insects and hornworms haven't exactly become a staple part of my diet, and if you come over to my house for dinner, I probably won't serve them to you unless you ask, I sure don't mind finding them on my tomato plants these days. Yum. Thank you.
CISA is so honored to bring you these stories about local food and our culture. If you'd like to learn more about CISA's work and our programs, please go to buylocalfood.org. Thank you.